Okay, you all, we are going to have something a little outside the ordinary today. I'm going to introduce you to.
What's that supposed to mean?
I'm I'm going to introduce you to somebody who was raised out here at Shaco, Mississippi, and I may have a very special association with. Um, we're going to go through a sort of an unusual career, two careers actually. And then when we get to the end of it, I can promise you that you're going to learn something about yourself you didn't know. Several things, as a matter of fact, and he'll be glad to explain it to you. So hang with us. I think you're in for a good time. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. James V. Richie. You may think that there's some kind of a special association with that, and there there is. Um, he is my firstborn, and we're going to go through a kind of an interesting career. But we're going to start with the emergency room at the Martin's Army Hospital at Fort Benning, Georgia, on August the 25th, 1962.
I remember it like it was yesterday. Maybe not.
Your first breath.
Yeah.
He almost didn't get started in this world, you all. His mother had a full-blown case of eclampsia. Back in those days, it was 80% fatal. The cure was to have the baby, but after a full-blown convulsion attack, they had to calm her down with calming things, which got in his bloodstream, which made it hard for him to breathe, hard to make him breathe when he finally entered this world. And I admit that's the only time in my life I've been truly terrorized, truly, fully terrorized. But God was good to me, and they both made it. So, with that start, we're gonna go through the life of Dr. James V. Richie up to this point, hopefully with a lot of years left.
We'll see.
Born there in Georgia, and First Lieutenant Jimmy W. Ritchie and Helen Perry Thickens Ritchie, who you've seen with our skydives and her art and all of that. So we're going to kind of keep this as a little family, another part of our family. Okay, Sport, you were born and finally got to Shaco when you were about, what, 7 or 8 or 9 years old or something like that.
Yeah, fifth grade, I think, was when we moved out here.
Had his own pony, had his own dogs, and we had, all our horses, and we hunted quail, and we had cows and chickens and cats and Lord knows cows, what else. And he graduated from Kent Academy, right, in 1980.
Class of 80, great
Class
group
of
of
80,
people.
salutatorian, and then went to Millsaps, right, on a key scholarship. And actually, folks, I'll tell you all, I had saved the money to have him go to pre-medical school, and he always wanted to be a doctor. One of the few people I've ever known who knew exactly what he wanted to be when he started walking. From age 3, hauling a doctor's kit around and Band-Aids on bedposts and all of those types of things. So there wasn't any question about what he was going to be when he was raised up. But then went to medical school on a special scholarship, right?
U.S. Navy.
U.S. Navy scholarship. And I got to confess to you, I was not sure how that was going to work out because in the military, as you know, things have to be in order and pristine, clean, and so forth. Well, when he was raised out here at Shaco, if you went into his bedroom, you had to have shots so that you didn't catch strange things from things that were growing in his closet.
But it was a creative clutter. That's what it
was. Net of it is through medical school, Then I'm gonna let you pick up from there when you got out of med school.
Oh, all right. After med school, so the Navy puts you to work in internships. So I did that in San Diego, Naval Medical Center, San Diego. That was for a year, which was great. Actually, got married. So we were, I had dated Martha in med school, graduated med school, we got married, went on our honeymoon, moved to California and started internship in the space of about 2 weeks. And then did internship. After that, went to Pensacola, Florida for flight surgery school, which was wonderful.
Well, wait just a minute. Medicine. Before you get to flight surgery school, I got one little thing I want to stick in here. Martha Hester was a physical therapist. You met her where actually you met her
on spring break in Destin, Florida.
And both of them had been going to school at the University Medical School in Jackson.
Not supposed to meet your spouse on spring break, but that's.
And the word was that you gave her engagement ring in a box of Cracker Jacks. Is that?
No, that's not true.
She said it was.
No. That's the thing. That was the kind of feint, because that was such a cliche that I thought, no, let's just do that. So I gave her a box of Cracker Jacks, and she was thinking, oh gosh, and she went through it, and it was not in there actually. So she was shaking it, looking for it, and I was just pretending like there was nothing going on, and then pulled it out later on. So that wasn't a nice thing to do.
Well, you ought to lie and say you did.
Yeah.
You'd have made a good story. Okay, back to flight school.
Yeah, it was great. Flight surgery school in Pensacola. Learned how to be an aviation medicine doctor and work with pilots and air crew, and learn how to fly the T-34 and soloed in that wonderful little go-kart of an aircraft. That was a blast. So we were there for 6 months, and then first duty station was in Sigonella, Sicily. So that was wonderful. We were there for 2 years, flying around in C-2s, going out to the aircraft carrier, landing there, taking off from there, and traveling all around the Mediterranean with the fleet. We had our first baby, Sarah, there up in Naples, and that was a wonderful tour. And then after that, we went to Key West, Florida, for the second flight surgery tour, and that was with basically the East Coast Top Gun Squadron, VF-45. So we were flying air-to-air combat, dogfighting training for the fleet, which was a blast. I got to fly around with those characters, just some wonderful human beings.
Did you get a chance to fly with them as in those jets?
Oh yeah, every week at least. F-16s, F-5s, A-4s, 9Gs and supersonic and all that stuff. That was a great time.
Did they ever let you take over the controls?
Yeah, they were kind enough to do that, but
strictly against regulation.
No. That's why we went to flight school in Pensacola. But yeah, I got to fly and zoom around up there and do a bunch of fun maneuvers. I didn't get to do the official dogfighting with them. That was varsity only. But
or the landing.
Right. Yeah, I could take off, but not the landing.
Okay. Then you decided, after all of those adventures in flight surgery, that you needed to rejoin the normal world of the living, right? Mm-hmm. And decide what kind of doctor you were going to be. Mm-hmm. Long range, so what then?
Yeah. Well, when we were in Key West, we had our second and third kiddos, Josh and Perry, and then it was time. There was no way that the flight surgery job was ever going to be any better than that. So it was time to pick a specialty, and had thought about a number of different things. But just when I thought about, my image of what was a doctor, it was someone who could handle whatever came through the door, and so that meant that I really, didn't need to be specialized in one particular area that couldn't do that sort of thing. And emergency medicine had always. Whenever I'd been working in the ER, I always came home with the best stories. So I said, that seems like that's the place where I have the most fun. So did emergency medicine residency in Portsmouth, Virginia.
Did it ever enter your mind that when you decided to go into emergency medicine, that, of course, the naval arm is the Marine medical arm, mm-hmm. that was going to put you right in the dead center of combat type situations with the Marines?
I doubt that it crossed my mind at that point. I was just looking for what was the most fun in medicine, really, But yeah, that's definitely the Navy medical takes care of the Marine Corps, and so that wound up being my primary second duty, other than mainly practicing in the emergency department.
Okay, then up comes a little dust up in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
So, how many tours there?
2 tours there. When we were in Portsmouth, I did residency training and then stayed on there as faculty, and graduated from there in '98, and then in 2001 we had our last 3 kiddos. We had in when we lived over there, so that was Helen and Meredith and James. But in 2001, when September 11th happened, and it was time to go do some business there. I deployed in 2001, right after September 11th, to Afghanistan with the first wave of Marines going into Afghanistan from the fleet out there.
So you were in that first contingency of Marines that went to Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah, the Special Forces had gone through and done some things, and as the Marines were coming in, that's when I came with them, with the first group actually to land at Kandahar Airfield. First 400 Marines and us, our little medical contingent.
Well, things were pretty basic there, weren't they?
Everything was blown up. Yeah, there was nothing as far as, things for us to move into. But that one thing that the Marines are really good at is surviving in the middle of nothing where everything's broken, and they fix it, make it work. And, I learned to really admire the way the Marine Corps carry themselves and operate, because they went with nothing and made it all work in short order. I was really impressed with that.
How long did you stay in there at first tour?
That was, we were in Kandahar only for 6 weeks that time, and then we were relieved in place. The Army finally showed up, and
man.
yeah, they showed up a month late, and we were able to turn over and move on.
Okay, so you came back from there to where?
Back to Portsmouth. So I became the residency director. So running the emergency medicine training program back at Portsmouth after that. Did that for 7 years, and that was wonderful. Fabulous, gratifying experience.
Well, when in that time did you go to your second tour?
Now that was, so I did 7 years as the residency director, and after I finished there, I was eligible to be deployed again. And so went back to Afghanistan in 2009 during the surge that time. If you remember, that was when the big push came to try to finally, push the Taliban out, and the surge that went in 2009 to 2010.
Well, I distinctly remember a telephone call you made to me the day before you decided to go.
That was the first time, actually. Yeah.
Was it?
Uh-huh.
Did you had the option to send somebody else in your place?
Well, yeah. So I was in charge of deciding who would go. So I was the platform leader, and we had, our list of people who we could choose. And there was one fella, Alan, who, as our group were talking about it, we said, he's a natural first choice. He's very capable, guy. He'll do very well with that. And then it was who's going to be the second one, and that was hard. So that was that was not a kind thing to do to you, to call and good advice. Hey, should I pick my own number and go to the war or not? And as I remember, you hesitated a little bit, and finally your advice was, if I sent somebody else, I'm not sure I'd want to look at myself in the mirror in the morning. And I said, that's exactly what I needed to hear.
So you weren't looking for advice, you were looking for affirmation.
No, I was looking for advice, and that was the right advice. So I got to go. I'm glad that was.
That advice was given with some trepidation, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciated it.
So you went there for how long?
The second time, it was an 8-month deployment, a couple of months of preparation, and then 6 months, on the ground in Helmand Province at Bastion Hospital, right in the middle of the busiest stuff. We were at that point, we were the busiest combat hospital, seeing more combat injured in Afghanistan, or more combat injured than all other facilities in Afghanistan and Iraq combined in 2009, because there were operations going on in both countries. So we were very busy.
Well, that was a Scottish hospital, wasn't it?
Well, UK, yeah. So it was a UK hospital, and we had, they actually were the majority of the medical staff. The Americans were only about a third of the staff, but we had a group from London in the London reservists in the first half of our term, and then the Scots showed up for the second half of our term, and just some outstanding individuals in both groups. Really admired the way they had the place set up and the way they did their jobs. It was good to work with them.
Well, so you saw some things that weren't pleasant at all coming through there, right?
Yeah, that was a pretty brutal tour. That was.
So, after that tour, back to
Portsmouth.
Mm-hmm. As what?
We had started a simulation center, a medical simulation center, when I was the residency director, and so I went back to run the simulation center.
Now, explain to them what that is.
So, there are flight simulators, right? That the pilots will, you put a pilot in the flight simulator, they learn how to fly the plane. You can give them emergencies that they then have to respond to without actually having them in a, huge airplane with passengers in the back. So that's a good thing. There are medical simulators too, in which you can run either an individual or teams. So they basically are, a lot of them are like full body mannequins that have pulses, and they breathe, and the eyes can open or close. They can make noises. You have them hooked to a monitor, and the blood pressure can change, or pulse, or whatever. You can defibrillate them. In other words, do the shock thing on them with the defibrillator. They can have different heart rhythms and just do all sorts of different things. So you can make up scenarios, just like with the flight simulator and the pilots. You can make up scenarios with these things that the doctors or the nurses or whoever have to interpret what's going on, make their changes, give the medications, and then the simulator changes what they're doing to respond to that. So you can do that. There are also some that are sort of like a virtual reality thing for the surgeons, because often with operations these days, the surgeons are not really diving into the abdomen or something. They are putting scopes in there, so you can, and then they're looking at a screen as they're moving their instruments, and there are some simulators that do that. They have the screen that is simulating the inside of the abdomen with these, and the practicing surgeon is using these scopes to move things around. So instead of using a little video controller, they're using these scopes that are set up specifically for their sort of work. So it's great stuff, and it's actually been shown to improve outcomes in surgery and in some specific emergency situations. So it's actually a really good, neat, new thing. It ain't cheap. All those things cost a lot. So they really needed to be shown to be effective, but that was a great addition to training throughout the whole hospital.
Yeah, they cost a lot, but how much money, how many lives do they save? Right, it's a concern.
Yeah.
And you were instrumental in starting that at that hospital.
Yeah, I mean, it was a team, but yeah.
Well, there's another thing that you were instrumental, I think, in starting outside of the normal range of medical practice, and with the Navy. And what was your observation about that you went on to talk to the big brass and the Navy about?
Are you talking about the combat medical ethics and that sort of a thing? Yeah. So when we were in Afghanistan the second time, that really was a difficult tour, and the medicine was challenging, but we were very successful at what we did medically. Like, we had a 98% survival rate among our patients. In other words, if they showed up with a pulse, 98% of them left our hospital with a pulse. And for combat trauma, that's incredible. So the system was working very, very well. However, the medics, the people who were involved in doing this, the doctors, nurses, techs, corpsmen, boy, that was really brutal. And a lot of us came back with a lot of burden, just, emotional, spiritual, like, oh gosh, what's going on? I came back with some PTSD. The medics who were not out in the middle of combat, but were having to deal with all the blown up people and all these just incredible situations. What do you do when you have a female Afghan patient in front of you and she's going to die without surgery, and the male family member with her is not allowing her to be treated because there are males in the hospital, because it would be dishonoring to her, and he drags her back out of the hospital and will not allow her to be treated. What do you do with that? Um, what do you do with, sometimes there were individuals who came in and they were alive, but then you find that they have an unsurvivable injury, and you really wanted to be able to save their lives, but there's no way that this is going to work, and maybe they're even conscious in those situations. So anyway, there were all sorts of scenarios. Gosh, some of them were like when, I'll just leave it at that. They were really burdensome to us, and when we started looking into things, we realized that a lot of the problems we had encountered were problems that had been known ahead of time, but no one had told us about those things. And if we had known about them, it would have made things so much easier. For example, one of the first questions we had was, with these guys who are all blown up, these young men, 18, 19 years old, who come in and now both arms or both legs and an arm, and maybe even their genitals are blown off, are they going to want to live? Are we doing a horrible thing by saving their lives? Would they have wanted not to live? And that was actually a question right in the front of a lot of our minds. And with these guys, they didn't stay with us very long. They would stay with us maybe a day or two until they were stabilized to be able to fly out. So they were generally kept sedated and intubated during that, so we didn't get a chance to talk to them. And we wondered about that. And then it was only towards the end of the tour, when we started looking into it, that we found out that, yeah, these guys are actually really glad to be alive. The studies had been done, and like 96% of them were very glad to be alive. And why hadn't somebody told us about that beforehand? With the issues with the Afghan women and not being allowed to treat them, that was something that had been known ahead of time. And actually, we came up with a means by which we could take care of them, and female-only resuscitation teams and things like that we had to put together and learn as we went. But other teams had known about it, and we wanted to be sure that the teams that were coming out knew about it. So I started putting together some talks about combat medicine ethics and power, vulnerability, doctors in war, and started giving those talks to our residency, to other residencies, to some other professional groups. I was giving that talk at one of the emergency medicine military national meetings, and there was a general there, neat guy, who heard that, and he said, "I want you to give that at the Pentagon, because we are not talking about that up there." So that's how I wound up giving that the talk on combat medicine ethics at the Senior Medical Officer Leadership course at the Pentagon on a fairly regular basis, and appreciated that opportunity. One of my favorite parts with that was when we were talking about moral injury, and that's a relatively new term. What that means is if someone commits, it actually was initiated in describing the soldiers, so that if someone did something, was party to something, or failed to prevent something that violated their deeply held moral values, then that can create moral injury. It's related to guilt. And so it was originally described in soldiers, who joined the military to defend their country, but then when you actually look somebody in the eyes and kill them, then, that's a shocking thing, and it can, produce a lot of guilt in you, a lot of conflict. What it was not generally as much recognized is that same sort of thing can happen in medics, we find ourselves in situations where, we didn't intend for this to happen, but man, what a burdensome situation we find ourselves in. And it can create guilt in us. So the neat thing about that is there are means by which you can take care of people who have moral injury. It's different from PTSD. PTSD is mainly about fear. Moral injury is mainly about guilt. The things that work with PTSD to help those people, like psychotherapy and medications, those don't work with moral injury. PTSD is more of an emotional thing. Moral injury is more of a spiritual thing. What works with moral injury is forgiveness. Well, among the things that works with moral injury, because it's a guilt-related thing. And some people had said that the things that they had committed, not even God would forgive them. And so I found it very helpful to point out that 1 John 1:9 says that if we're faithful to confess to the Lord, then he is faithful to forgive and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so I put that in my lectures, including the ones at the Pentagon. It surprised me because when I gave the first talk at the Pentagon and explained, here's the answer, we can find forgiveness in the Lord regardless of what we've done. I was really expecting that in that environment, that would not be well received. So I figured I'd probably give this talk only once, and that would be my swan song. And when it was over with, the guy who was running the course said, "When can you come back? We'd like to have you do this again in October." And in all the times that I gave that at the Pentagon, there was only one guy who ever objected to that, and it was an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. And he said, "I really feel that that's inappropriate in this forum." And so I acknowledged his objection, and I said, but just understand, these guys are hurting, and they need something. Here is something that is clearly an answer, and my question to you is, what do you got? And he said, I'm not prepared to answer that question, but I feel that it's inappropriate in this forum. And I said, then we understand each other. And I was never asked to take it out, and I kept it in every single one of them.
Good for you. Yeah. Okay. Then you spent how many years then you were there at Norfolk until you
retired.
Until you
retired. Yeah, 2013.
So you retired after
25 years.
25 years as a captain. Mm-hmm. I was a captain in the Army.
That's it. I hadn't gotten any salutes out of you yet. What's up with that?
Well, probably won't either. But, all right. So while you were in the Navy, though, you had a chance to do a couple of missions in a foreign land, mm-hmm. right?
Yep.
And that turned around some things in your life, didn't it?
Yeah. So had opportunity to go to Kenya a couple of times to do some teaching, and just really was amazed at the people who I was running into in Kenya, just these young medical folks who were trying to learn. So we were teaching them ACLS, Advanced Cardiac Life Support.
What now?
It's
say that again.
Advanced Cardiac Life Support. So it's basically when people's heart stops, when they have a heart attack or their heart goes into a fatal rhythm. What do you do? So we were going to teach them how to use the defibrillator, the shocking machine, that sort of thing. And boy, just some really motivated, fine young medics there, Kenyan and from other countries. And they were trying to learn from us because they knew they were going to have to go out on their own as medical officers or even just as interns, and they had nobody else who was going to help them. So they were ready to learn anything we had to present. They were very motivated, very attentive students, and just really fine people. So I appreciated what they were doing, and we were wondering, maybe the Lord would have something for us to do like that.
Well, then would you do 2 or 3 tours of that, and then when did you decide to do that on a more permanent basis?
In 2012, we were wondering, this was like a year before time to retire, and we said, all right, it's time for a bit of a vision trip. And when I had gone before, I was wondering if there was a place for us, but there was conspicuously no invitation when I had gone before. So we prayed for an invitation. When would the Lord do that? And it wound up that we did get one. That's a whole different story. But we went in 2012 to go. I went with Martha, my wife, and 3 of our kids who would be the ones to decide whether they wanted to go with us if we went over there long term. And we went to Tamwick Hospital, Kijabe Hospital, and Chogoria Hospital to see if there was an invitation, a place for us to land there. That was the decision point.
So what was the shape of Chogoria when you got there?
In 2012, Chogoria had been, first of all, it was started by the Scots back in 1922. They had built it up into a wonderful tertiary referral place with like 300 beds and all this stuff, but the Western support had left around 2000, 2002 for a number of reasons, and so the hospital then had no external support, And you just really can't operate a mission hospital without external support, because pretty much by definition, you're in a place where the people around you don't have much money. They're materially poor, and the folks in our area would make an average of like $1 or $2 a day from subsistence farming or things like beating rocks into gravel. And there's just no way that they could afford medicine. And so the hospital, without that external support, had gone into decline. Excuse me. And when we arrived to look around in 2012, it basically, the doctors at the hospital were pretty much all government doctors that were sent there to just kind of keep the doors open, and it was in great financial peril. We didn't really realize that at this point, but they definitely were welcoming of having some Westerners and some Western support come back to the hospital. So the invitation was clear, and we really felt like that was a place where we were supposed to serve.
Well, as far as location is concerned, Chocoria is on the slopes of Mount Kenya, right?
Eastern slopes of Mount Kenya. So yeah, it's a beautiful area.
How far from Nairobi?
About a 4-hour drive from there.
Yeah, so it's in the boondocks.
Yeah. Yeah, the hospital is definitely the biggest employer, the biggest game in town, in our little place, which is probably too small to call a town, but a little too big to call a village, But yeah, that was, it is pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. But there are some decent sized towns, like a 45-minute drive away.
So what programs do you feel like you got started there?
We were able to.
By the way, before we start, your family was the only Westerners in that outfit. You were the only white faces there, right?
Pretty much. There were some other folks who came short term and visited there. And there were a couple of ladies actually who were working in an NGO out in town. But as far as the hospital was concerned, yeah, we were the only Westerners there for about the first 18 months. And at one point we wondered, gosh, is this even going to work? Because we were supposed to go home after 2 years for our first, kind of break. And no one had signed on to join with us from the Western side. Now, some Kenyans had joined us who were excellent people. We had a Kenyan general surgeon, 2 Kenyan general surgeons, and a Kenyan obstetrician. And they had joined on with us, and they were wonderful people. So we were very glad to have them join in there with missions work at the missions hospital. But it wasn't until we'd been there for about 18 months before the first Westerners joined us, the Webbers and then the Brotherton Streets. We were very grateful to have them so they could hold down the fort when we went on our first break.
Well, some changes were made during that 6 years. You can give us an idea of what the staff was like. Well, when you got there, the staff was pretty minimal. No question about that.
As far as a mission hospital, the mission efforts of the hospital, yeah, pretty much all the doctors that worked there, the specialty trained ones, and also the kind of the general medical officers, all of them had been sent, and the interns, they'd been sent there by the government, and missions was not on their mind. There was one doctor, Franklin Ikunda, who was there direct hire and directly hired by the hospital, and he wanted to see it become a missions hospital again. So that was great. But then by the time we left, all of the attendings, all the consultants were missions doctors, either from the West or from Kenya. And we had a full family medicine residency going on right then. And we also had, the interns also had been sent by the government, but most of them we had been able to select as people who would work out well for the hospital. So it was very much a mission hospital staff at that point.
So you really basically headed up another residency program there. Yeah, kind of your baby to take care of.
Yeah, I mean, we were part of a consortium of 3 different hospitals and a university. The university kind of did the academics, and then there were 2 other hospitals and us that were running the family medicine residency. And so, yeah, I helped start the family medicine residency at Chogoria, and then that was taken over by some other people, and we stayed on as faculty.
And during this time, Martha, your lovely red-headed wife, had some very distinctive or definite goals herself, functions.
Yeah. That was something that was always funny to me when we were going over there. People would say, "Well, we know what you're going to do. You're going to do like a missionary doctor thing. What's your wife going to do?" And if you know Martha, you know that that's kind of a silly question. She will find things to do that are very effective and do them very well. It's a given, and that's what she did. Um, one of my favorite parts about Chagoria is um, when we were training the residents, they came from all sorts of different places. They weren't just all from Kenya. We had residents from Burundi and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda and South Sudan. I mean, it was just, and Kenya. But I mean, it was just wonderful. Just all these different people coming from different places there. There were so many different languages floating around, and but one of the great dynamics of that though was that everybody was from somewhere else. Even the Kenyans who were working there, the Kenyan attendings, were actually from somewhere else, and they had come to this place. So all of it, none of us had family locally. So we became each other's family, and it turned into this community. One of the reasons it turned into the community was because that's what Martha did. She built community. She would go and, you know, find somebody and let them teach her how to do some things, and then she would teach them how to bake. Because, for instance, ovens were kind of were something that not a lot of people there knew how to use. A lot of people had them, but they had never really baked anything. So she taught the ladies how to bake. When the residents would come with their wives from another country, one wife, each had one wife, but then you have to make that distinction in Africa. But when they would come with a wife from another country, you know, these would be ladies who maybe didn't speak the language at all. Maybe they would speak French or Kirundi or, you know, something like that. And so Martha would work with them to help them learn, you know, some of the language around there and teach them how to cook and how to become part of the community. So Martha became the community builder. And when we had been training to come to Chagoria, and when we were in Chagoria, we had learned a particular way of learning language, not like the way you usually learn it in school, but a much more experiential, verbal way of learning language. And so Martha put together a language school there and taught some of the local people how to teach, you know, new people to learn Swahili, or other languages like that. So she started building that up, and so it was.
You all learned Swahili.
Yeah, we learned Swahili to a functional level. I could use it around the hospital in particular, but you know, we were never really fluent, but we were functional. But yeah, it was the community was fabulous. That was something actually that Chagoria became known for. I mean, it was not at all unusual for us to have a Bible study or something in the house, and in our little living room there might be 30 people packed in there sitting on the floor. You'd have to step over people to move at all. But just a really joyous place. A lot of music, a lot of appreciation of each other. It was great. So Martha was the #1 community builder, start the language school, go down to the hospital and pray with the patients and work with the chaplains, and just really bless people down there. So yeah, she was a lot of the glue that held the place together.
Well, I'll tell you this, the one time I went over there to visit you all with your mother, and it was obvious that the people in Chagoria loved you too. You and Martha were very special people to them. I cannot tell you how many times and how many people told me that. So wow. You were valuable to them. So you all this, and when you left after 6 years, what did the staff look like?
Well, let's see. We had 2 general surgeons, an obstetrician, a pediatrician, an internist, all of whom were most of whom were Kenyan, and then some Americans on staff, some family physicians there. Some of our graduates had stayed there, or one of our graduates by the time we left had stayed there. And others, we had graduated 4 residents by that time, all of whom were working in mission hospitals themselves at that point. So I loved that. 2 guys from Burundi, a Congolese guy and a Kenyan guy, and they continue to work, you know, with the underserved wherever they are. And I just love that. I think that's terrific. We had pretty much a full residency at that point. The surgeons had started their own residency there. And one of the best parts about the hospital is when we had arrived, I'll just say that the chaplaincy was not doing a whole lot. And you know, by God's grace, he brought some magnificent chaplains to that place, and we had 7 chaplains who were on fire for the Lord around that place. And it really became known as, if you want to be prayed for, if you want to be engaged spiritually in your medical situation, go to Chagoria. We had some people who would come to us from Nairobi, which is the big city where, there's even an American accredited hospital in Nairobi. Some people would come to us in Chagoria because they knew that they would be prayed for every day. And, we knew that the missions effort of the hospital had gone well when some people came and said, there was a gate guard out there who would tell people, if you come to this hospital, you will meet the doctor and you will also meet Jesus. And we said, yes. That's what we were looking for.
Well, you ran into something that after you left there and came back, you had a sort of a program started in your own mind that paralleled the one you had in the military, so far as getting folks ready to do some things that maybe they weren't expecting.
Yeah. So we had been working with folks with PTSD and moral injury in the military, and I really wasn't expecting, for some reason, to encounter that kind of stuff in missions medicine. But when we arrived, we realized that it was absolutely still there. People encounter that all the time, just the volume of people dying around you because people die at a younger age, and with the amount of demand for medical services, a lot of people who otherwise don't have access to medical services, so they come, and you actually have fewer resources there than you have in the United States. So more people who are sicker and have greater needs and less resources in the form of personnel and stuff to be able to take care of them. And so there's a lot of burden, a lot of situations where, let's say, for instance, someone comes and they have lymphoma. We diagnose lymphoma. In the United States, lymphoma is mostly a treatable disease, so that, most people survive if they have lymphoma. Over there's just no way to treat them, at our place. They couldn't afford chemotherapy, and we couldn't afford to provide chemotherapy for everybody who had that disease. So what would have been treatable over here with a high likelihood of success, those people would go into a palliative program, just like a hospice program, to get them ready to finish up. So there are all sorts of things like that. And cross-cultural medicine is difficult too. Things can happen that you never would have anticipated. A friend of ours was a family doctor, and he had helped a lady deliver twins. The twins were unexpected, and so, but he helped her deliver twins, and said, okay, you've got twins, congratulations. The lady did not seem all that pleased, though, and he thought, well, it's a surprise. She has an extra mouth to feed, whatever. But he tucked them in, and everything was good to go, and he went home. When he came back the next day, there was only one baby, and when he asked the nurses, they seemed reluctant to even acknowledge that there had been a second baby. So he was wondering what's going on here, and when he asked into it further, he found out that in their culture, the first baby, when they had twins, the first baby was considered to be a natural birth, and the second one was considered to be a demon who was trying to sneak its way into the world. And so they would do away with the second baby, basically kill the second baby. And he had no idea about any of that. But of course, as the doctor, you feel responsible for your patients. And he realized that, this kid who was on his service, he was this child's doctor, had been done away with. So, those sorts of things, that's a cross-cultural issue that we're not going to encounter over here so much. Completely blindsided him, and he felt, guilt about that. So we learned that moral injury is something that's just inherent to cross-cultural medicine, and we needed to be able to prepare people for those sorts of things. We had another friend who, she's a surgeon, and she had gone to, this was not Kenya, she'd gone to another country. She was expecting to be able to work in this very needy country with a missionary doctor who was very well known, very experienced. But when she got there, she realized that this guy had been reassigned, and she was pretty much on her own in this country, where she was like, I forget what the number was, but it was something like they only had like 10 surgeons in the whole country. And so she was just completely covered up with one emergency after another, taking care of conditions that she'd never seen before, being asked to do surgeries that she had never seen before. But really, she was the only possible option. If she didn't do the surgery, the patient was going to die. And some of her patients did die, and she didn't know whether it was her fault because she didn't know what she was doing or what. But you can imagine what that does to people. And so, she was able to hang in there for a few months, but then not. So, when you start to hear those sorts of stories and you realize, hey, this is not a functional setup. This is not good. We started being able to reach out to people and help them learn how to have boundaries so you can continue to do this for the long term. Learn how to manage these cross-cultural situations and how to deal with moral injury. And so we started talking about those things again, how to have boundaries so that you can still do well for a great number of patients over a long period of time, but without thinking that you're the answer to all of your patients' problems, that God is actually sovereign in the situation and you can trust him to handle it. There are so many things that became important for us to learn, some of them very much the hard way, and then things that we could share with some other people. So I found myself dusting off some of the old lectures and, putting some new terms in there and new situations and sharing that with some of the people, especially the new ones who are on their way to the field for the first time.
Well, that had a bearing too on the longevity of the term that missionaries would stay over there. You learned that if they didn't set those boundaries, then their anticipated time wouldn't be met, right?
The number of medical missionaries who don't stay nearly as long as they had anticipated, that's probably more the rule than otherwise. In other words, a lot of people go to the mission field expecting to serve for a full career. And I would say at this point that the majority, perhaps the significant majority, finish up and go home within 3 years instead of staying for a full career.
Simply because they don't know how to set the boundaries.
Some of that,
burnout.
Yeah, some of it's burnout, some of it's moral injury. Then there are other things that are inevitable, like sometimes you encounter family emergencies, or your child has an educational need that simply can't be met over there, or there are other reasons that people come back. But yeah, some of those are preventable, I think.
So who are some of the organizations that you're working with now?
Well, currently I'm working primarily with an organization called MedSend, which works with like 50 different mission agencies that send healthcare missionaries around the world. And so MedSend is sort of MedSend was formed to help healthcare missionaries deal with their educational debt so that they can still serve on the field. So that's great. But we found ourselves being in a position of kind of expertise with healthcare missionaries, because most mission agencies do very well in sending missionaries, but most mission agencies have missionaries of all different sorts. Maybe there are church planters, Bible translators, missions, and business has missions folks, people who are teaching agriculture or water, or water wells or that sort of a thing. And medical missions is just one small part of what they're doing. But in the things that I was describing about medical missions, sometimes the mission agencies don't have enough medical missionaries to develop an expertise in preparing them and going and sustaining them when they're on the field. So we've kind of found ourselves at MedSend in that role of helping prepare missionaries to be able to go to the field and thrive, and then support them while they're there, helping to come off the field and learn the things that they need to learn and debrief some of the stuff that they've encountered. So MedSend participates in preparatory classes. We have some coaches that we help train up so that they can then work with the missionaries while they're on the field. We have special retreats that are set up specifically for healthcare missionaries so they can come and talk about the things that they've been involved in and prepare them to get back into the game.
And these missionaries are with other organizations like Samaritan's Purse and some of the other organizations.
Right. Samaritan's Purse kind of has their own wing with that. We definitely work with Samaritan's Purse, partner with them in different things, but they're not really one of our official partner organizations. But there are all sorts of big mission agencies that really do a good job, like Pioneers and Frontiers and SIM and AIM and WGM and just all these different organizations that really do so very well. We kind of help come alongside to assist with their healthcare missions arm, and they're valued partners. We feel like it's a good partnership in both directions.
Okay, well, so what do you and Martha see as your future, immediate future?
Well, Martha is working since we're back in the States now for the most part, with some travel overseas, but we're based here. She's working with some of the Afghan refugees in our area, teaching them English and helping them learn how to operate in our culture, which is something that we can do because we learned how to operate in somebody else's culture. She's also working with a lot of missionary retirees within World Gospel Mission, and helping with certain language programs, and doing some mom counseling, if you will, with some missionaries who are trying to start new things, especially educationally with their families, like homeschooling for the first time, sending their kids to missionary boarding school for the first time, sending their kids back to college while the families stay on the mission field and they're sending them back. So Martha's been able to coach some people in doing all of those sorts of things. So she's staying busy with that, and we will continue doing these sorts of things for as long as the Lord wants us to do. Been able to go around and talk to a number of people about these issues and help prepare people, and it looks like that's going to be continuing to expand with a bunch of different options. Doing some writing and some talking and some, just whatever opportunities are available, we try to walk into those as best we can.
Well, that'll pretty well wind this up. There's a whole lot of other things to do, but I promised the folks at the beginning of this thing that you would enlighten them on some things about themselves that they probably didn't know that might have happened to you in Martin Army Hospital on the 25th of August of 1962. So you might go through that and tell, what does a child go through at the moment of birth?
Well, okay, so I guess my favorite part of that is what happens with their heart right at the beginning. And it's something that, until you study these sorts of things, you really wouldn't have picked up. So, I mean, the way our hearts work at this point is we basically have two hearts, that are right next to each other. But there's a right side of the heart and a left side of the heart that operate kind of independently. The right side of the heart, the blood comes from your body to the upper chamber, that goes to the lower chamber, and then it goes to your lungs to get oxygen, for the blood to get oxygenated, carbon dioxide to go. From there, it comes back to the left side of the heart, upper chamber, and then it goes to the lower chamber that pumps the blood out to the rest of your body. So from the body to the right side to the lungs, to the left side out to the body. So that's how our circulatory system works. So when we're developing as little bitty ones, like when that first cell starts, okay, you don't really need a circulatory system. But once even a clump of cells starts, there's nutrient fluid around there, but after the number of cells gets thick enough, that nutrient fluid can't get through. And you start to develop a circulatory system when you're basically just like a little plate of cells there with a little heart thing in the middle that starts to contract, and a couple of little tubes around there to start delivering fluid to these developing cells. And then that becomes a plate, and then the plate rolls into a ring that also has a circulatory system, kind of a tube. Then it stretches out, but that little clump of cells that starts beating in there, one of the neat things about that is that it's just a little chamber when it starts. But that chamber has to work as a functioning pump for the circulatory system as it develops itself, as it there becomes a second chamber, and then they start contracting sequentially, and then those chambers get bigger and they twist around on themselves, and little dividing things start growing in there to separate the chambers into different pieces, and the valves start to develop in there. And it's just this incredible sequential system that has to continue to function, and function at a higher level as it goes, to start circulating more and more fluid, more and more blood. The cells develop in there, the red blood cells, the white blood cells. I mean, it's just this incredibly complicated system as we develop, and develop arms and legs and so forth, and those blood vessels stretch out there, and the demands on that heart continue to grow. But the way the heart is set up, like a minute before you're born, all those chambers are in place, but the upper chambers up here are not really completely separated yet. So there's a bit of a dividing thing between the two, but there's this valve in there. The reason there's a valve is because your lungs, when you're still, in the uterus, the lungs are kind of compressed. The little air cells in there are flat, and there's no oxygen in there. The baby's getting oxygen from the mom through the umbilical cord, right? So the lungs aren't doing anything. Your lungs have an automatic reflex in there that when there's no oxygen in those air cells, the blood vessels around them constrict down so that the blood flow doesn't go to those air cells, because that would make it useless for the blood to flow around there with no oxygen there. So those are tightened down. Therefore, that right-sided chamber in the heart that pumps blood to the lungs, there's so much resistance in the lungs that it really doesn't have a place to push. The place for the blood to go. There's a little bit that goes there, but not a lot. So that backs up the pressure into the right upper chamber there, but there's the flutter valve in there now, so that as the higher pressure is there, that blood flows across that flutter valve to the left side, and then that's pumped out to the body. So basically it bypasses the lungs for the most part because there's no oxygen there. All that is going on while you're developing, with the latter parts of the blood comes from the body to this chamber, so much pressure that it pushes the blood to the left side across that flutter valve and then back out to the body without going to the lungs very much. Again, a little bit there, but not so much. Until you're born and you take that first breath of air. When that happens, those little air cells pop open, air goes in there, and those blood vessels then start to see some oxygen. When they see oxygen, those blood vessels begin to dilate up. They're not constricted anymore, so blood can flow around there. When that happens, the pressure that's then in that right chamber, that decreases, the resistance decreases, so that chamber now can start to pump blood to the lungs. When that pressure decreases, the pressure decreases in the right side, and as this blood is pumped to the lungs, and it comes back to the left side, the pressure builds in that left upper chamber, which shuts that flutter valve so that the blood can no longer go across. It now has to go to the lungs and come to the left side. So now all of a sudden, within the first few breaths, that little flutter valve shuts, and the heart that used to be basically one side communicating with the other becomes the two separate pumps, so that the blood comes from the body to this side, goes to the lungs, when now it's oxygenated, comes to the left side, and that oxygenated blood is then pumped back out to the body. And you can watch that happen when a baby is delivered. They come out kind of gray and blue and dusky, and within a minute or two, they start to pink up, and usually they're nice and bright pink by 5 minutes. It's just incredible that all of that stuff is set up, is in place for the first breath. So, when you look at that stuff, especially things developing in the circulatory system and the heart having to function, even, before hardly anything is up and working, I'll just confess that I used to be an evolutionist. I used to argue loudly for evolution until you see these sorts of things happen over and over again, and you realize, man, the odds of that stuff developing, I know people talk about billions of years, but I'm sorry. I started to lose arguments with myself in the shower of saying, no, it actually could have happened. And then I had to say, no, actually, I just don't believe that it could. It's just another example of amazing things that the Lord does that we just don't even know about until we're given the privilege of studying it and learning about it some more.
Well, you have lived and learned.
Yeah.
Of that, I am grateful. Okay, sport. Well, appreciate your letting us know about that. And all you out there now, you did not know that all that was going on when you took your first breath, did you?
Yeah,
Most
well done.
You didn't. Huh?
Well done. You did well with that.
Yeah, you did a good job, evidently. So, thank you, Doctor. We'll now adjourn for dinner and take the rest of this visit.
All right.
Thank you all for watching. We'll see you with another interesting person here before too long. I've got some things planned I think you'll enjoy as well. So, till then, this is Jim Richie. I'll see you again next time.